Today's text that we have is a long one. We have this season of Easter that is 7 Sundays long. Traditionally, in the life of the church, we say that we celebrate Easter for a week of weeks, is how we count it. So we will go 49 days, 7 by 7, right? See how we got there? And then on the 50th day, Pentecost, Pentagon, 5, we get that image there. Pentecost, we will celebrate the coming of the Holy Spirit. But during this season, we remember Easter in all of its stories and glory. And so when we have today's text, we realize that we start to pretty quickly run out of actual stories in the gospel that are about Jesus appearing after his resurrection. We don't have tons of them. Most of the stories about Jesus in the Gospels take place earlier in his ministry, before the events of Holy Week. But today, we get one of those few stories. And I want to set the context a little bit, because I think we immediately jump to conclusions about what happens at the time of the resurrection and following. Our perception at the resurrection is that everybody is thrilled. Somebody runs back to the house to make sure that the ham is in the oven. Somebody makes sure that the flowers get taken from the tomb to be put on the table. Everybody makes sure that their database is up to date so their Easter cards get to everybody on time. And that is in no way, shape, or form what it would have looked like. Remember, if we go back to Holy Week, we are talking about a prominent teacher of the people of Israel, one that was politically threatening to the Roman Empire in that place, one who was then executed by the state, effectively for treason. You can imagine that people were a little anxious to be associated with Jesus. Last Sunday, we heard the story of doubting Thomas, and you can picture them all locked up in the upper room, drawing straws to see who was going to go out and get groceries that day, right? Because I don't want to go out there. I've got that heavy accent that's going to pick me out as somebody that came to Jerusalem with Jesus, right? And when we hear the story that we have today, we get another interesting part of the puzzle. As we think of Conclave coming to an adult forum near you this morning, we think of Peter as the first pope traditionally, although Peter would not have actually had any idea of that concept. But we picture kind of after Easter morning that he would have been fitting himself for a mitre and making sure that the vestments were right and kind of moving on. But that's not what we have. They kind of gave up in a fashion. They went back to what they used to do. Now, in my first call, I was in northwest Minnesota in a town called Alexandria. And my experience, there are others here that could correct me, but whenever there was a day off from school, you would see like every 11-year-old boy around any tiny piece of water to be had out there fishing. Now, I did not grow up with that kind of experience, but the idea of it as a recreational event, and that's not to say that that fish wasn't going home to be had at dinner sometime soon. But what the disciples are doing here is not fishing for fun. That's not what they're doing. They're going back to their trades, right? This Jesus thing seems to have kind of run its course. And what am I good at? Well, let's see. I know how to fish, so we're going to go and fish. And when we talk about fishing, we're talking about boats, nets. We're talking about, at least by that time and place, a commercial set of fishing, right? And so they are out on the lake, and they are fishing all night, like you do, and they've caught nothing. So you can imagine, it's probably quiet in the boat, thinking, we're a little rusty, right? We haven't done this in a while. Most scholars would look at the Gospels and have the sense that Jesus' ministry was maybe 3 years in length, his public ministry that we read about. So it's been a while since they've been out on the lake actively. But there they are, and they hear a voice call from the beach. You haven't caught any fish, have you? No. Just rub it in, buddy. Appreciate it. But it reminds us of a different story, right? Where they are fishing, and Jesus gives them some advice. Why don't you throw your nets on the other side of the boat? And Peter goes, yeah, thanks for the advice, buddy, but we're professionals here, and we've been out here all night, and this is just the way it's going to be. And he says, well, why don't you try it? And we know that it almost sinks the boat, right? Do you notice the sequence in this story, though? They obey immediately, which is kind of curious. Why don't you put your net on the right side of the boat? The fish are there. It's like the dumbest idea ever, right? They've been out there all night. They know the lake. The boat's probably not that wide. How big is the left side from the right side? It's a big lake, right? But they immediately respond with, sure, hey, yeah, let's put the nets on the right side. See what happens. And suddenly the net is bursting. So then they realize who is on the shore. Peter throws some clothes on. Such a strange phrase, right? He's out there fishing naked. I suspect that naked probably meant with, his swim trunks on, and he throws something else on, but also throwing more clothes on to jump into at any rate. He gets to the shore, and Jesus is there. And we get this kind of classic sacramental language. Jesus gives them bread. He gives them fish. And suddenly, they know things are different. Now, I think that one of the things that we take from the text as we have it today is a recognition that every time we perhaps walk out of this space, we're inclined to return to fishing. That was what I do at 8:30 on a Sunday in Palo Alto as I roll in here, and then I head back to my boat and get the nets ready for the next day. And I think there is a bit of a challenge to us in the reading to understand what does it mean to continue that work that Christ calls us to be about. Like at the end of the service, when we go through the dismissal, we say, go in peace, serve the Lord. That this is kind of a time of respite, a time of grace, a time of forgiveness, a time of being nourished and encouraged, picked back up, dusted off, and sent back out to continue the work of this life that Christ has called us to. That's, I think, the Easter story. But I want to, it's kind of two parts. I want to go to the story of Saul, or Paul, as we call him. When we think of Paul and his conversion, one of the things that is always kind of amazing to me is that he is just a fanatic. We have read about him in the stoning of Stephen, right? That he is standing there collecting the coats of those throwing the rocks at Stephen as he dies. He's a young intellectual leader in the life of the Jewish community there, and he has had it with these Christians. And so he goes on his own initiative and talks to the leaders in the temple and says, I want to go to Damascus, and I want to round up the Christians in that place and bring them back bound so that they can answer for their beliefs. I guess there's a form for that. So they say, sure, yeah, okay. And they send him off. But something happens on the way. He is struck. I had a professor in seminary that suggested that perhaps he was epileptic, actually, that there are other parts in Paul's own writings that discuss an ailment that he has that is embarrassing and awkward and difficult. He falls down and is blinded, and he cannot see. He goes into Damascus, and Ananias, a Christian, is called by God to go and to minister to Saul. And you can picture Ananias. So, right. So we've heard about this guy, and he's here to round us up and take us back bound. We know that he was there when Stephen was killed. This guy is a hard case. I'm not sure I want to do that. But nonetheless, Ananias goes. And do you notice how Saul, who soon becomes Paul, doesn't miss a beat? As fanatical as he was towards the persecution of the Christians, he becomes equally fanatical about sharing the good news of Jesus Christ to all who will listen, traveling all the way around, well, most of the way, to Italy, and all different places to share the good news of Jesus Christ that does not separate Arab from Jew, Greek from Hebrew, none of these. A different fanaticism, we might say, about love, perhaps. And that's the last thing I'll leave you with related to the children's sermon this morning. In Greek, there are several words that we would translate in English to the word love. One that does not show up in this text is the word eros, where we get the idea of physical love. We have phileo, which is the idea of brotherly love, Philadelphia. And then we have agape, this sense of unconditional love, this love of God towards us. And this text is translated so badly and has been for 2,000 years. So I'm going to summarize it for you just a little differently. Jesus says to Peter, Peter, do you agape me? Do you love me unconditionally? And Peter says, Lord, you know I phileo you, that I love you like a brother. Feed my sheep. And Jesus asks again, Peter, do you agape me? And Peter now is starting to feel uncomfortable. And he says, Lord, you know that I phileo you. I love you like a brother. And then Jesus asks one more time, Peter, do you phileo me? And the text says that Peter was grieved because the third time Jesus said, phileo. And Peter responds, yes, Lord, you know that I phileo you. There is this push. And I wonder, in our world right now, where empathy in some circles is seen as a bad word, where cruelty in many corners seems to be the purpose and the point, that this idea that Christ is challenging us to love others, not in the way that we deserve or they deserve, but rather in the way in which Christ loved us. Now, here's the thing I think we need to remember with this. There are some people that at times are hard to love. But this is the key point. Sometimes it's us. Sometimes we are the ones that are hard to love. And in the midst of a community like this, we live into that. We nudge ourselves and encourage one another into that kind of love that is forgiving, a kind of love that is unconditional, a kind of love that is self-sacrificing, like Christ's love for us. Amen.